I'm Scott L. Miller. It is the 13th of July, 2022, and welcome to my vlog of daily life in Nicaragua. It's Wednesday, and today I actually got a lot of time to just stay home and work all day. It's my final, full-on catch-up time because early this morning, I actually set my alarm at 5:45 because I thought that Brian and Kat were going to leave at about 6. So I'm like, all right, great. I'll get up at 5:45. I will run out, say goodbye to them, and I'll have plenty of time because the taxi's always late and it'll be plenty of time. So I got up and the dogs are like, what the heck's going on? And I ran over and went to check on them and found that they had both already left. They'd been picked up by the taxi and taken. And so I completely missed them. Kat's keys were left on the table and they were gone. The taxi was actually early instead of late. And yeah, I missed the whole thing. So they are on their way to the Nica Expresso, which gets them on the east side of town and is taking them to Costa Rica. Now, the Expresso takes you all the way to San Jose, but they're not going to San Jose. They're simply going to Liberia. Luckily, both of them managed to get flights out of that closer airport. That's the one that I often recommend for people who are flying from Nicaragua to pretty much anywhere except for Mexico and Panama. Mexico and Panama make the most sense to fly out of Managua and go directly to those destinations, but most everywhere else you're going to get better connections out of Costa Rica, primarily Liberia. Liberia mostly services the United States, whereas San Jose tends to go to most of the world. So if you're going to Spain, you're going to want to go on to San Jose. But if you're going to the US, chances are Liberia is going to work really well for you. What's important is Liberia is just 90 minutes over the border and San Jose is several hours over the border. Now, San Jose has a lot more going on. So if you're actually going to Costa Rica and wanting to do things, you're going to find that San Jose is a big, vibrant city with a lot going on. And that's where Paul is right now. And Liberia is just a small little town supporting the airport. It is technically the traditional capital of the Guanacaste, but it's a very small town in a very small region. It's a little bit smaller, I think, than Rivas, and Rivas is the traditional capital of Rivas, the sister zone in Nicaragua, and both are essentially empty. They're the most empty portions of their respective countries, the difference being all of Costa Rica is taken into account, and you do that, and you ignore the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua, which is not traditionally Nicaragua when we say Rivas is the least populated zone. Obviously, those areas are jungle. They're completely unpopulated. So that was pretty much my day. That was how it started. And then for the rest of the day, I did a bunch of video work. I had a backlog that I was able to catch up on. So as of today, totally caught up. I almost made this video on the same day, but sometimes it's just easier to make the next day. And I'm starting to do more work with the Olympus. So I'm hoping that this really turns out. I did some tests today on the 13th using the 50 millimeter manual focus 7 Artisans f 0.95 lens, which I absolutely love, but it's really hard to work with when I'm on my own. You have to have a stand-in and map out the distance and do all kinds of really careful focus. So today I'm doing the same camera, but I'm working with the 45 millimeter, which is an autofocus, and I'm hoping that that's able to get everything and still look good. And I have it on aperture priority, but I can't see the screen, so I actually don't know what it's set to. I am hoping that it is where I meant it to be, and I have a polarizing filter on. So this is a first test of doing an episode using that, and we'll see how it turns out. I've done a lot of different tests with this camera in the past. It's always worked really well, and I'm using the Rode wireless mic, and I'm actually standing out in the church grounds at Laborio here in Leon, Nicaragua, and I felt like because of the tall grass and stuff, I was able to set up the tripod in the middle of the churchyard, and I'm just kind of doing my thing without worrying about it. So we'll see. So it's a big test. Other than that, I spent the whole day doing regular work, lots of stuff for the office, but did a lot of catch up. That went really well. And cooked for the girls multiple times today, did several loads of laundry. And then this evening, finally, we got time, now that everyone has gone, that we sat down and we played Genshin Impact. And this is a really big deal for us because this is the first time that the girls and I have been able to play Genshin Impact together. We've always played it in the same room. They would play on their iPads while I play on the computer, and that's kind of fun. And they make fun of me for being really bad at the game, and they help me get through some difficult spots. But today, I finally, so just before I went to Guatemala, the day before, I managed to get far enough in the game that you're able to have multiple players in your game. So the girls were able to join my game world and play with me, but we didn't have time to do it. It was right as I went to bed, I had just made it. They were so excited. This is the thing we've been working towards for so long. Then I went to Guatemala, so I've been gone. Now that I am back, this is the first time that we're able to do multiplayer, so they're able to join me in my game world and go around, and we're able to fight things together. So now it is a family activity where we're playing the game cooperatively. They play from their iPads and I play from the computer, and we're all in the same thing, doing the same thing. That was a lot of fun. And we had other people join us, because anyone can join your game world if you let them. So we had random strangers jumping in as well. So we had a lot of fun. That was really cool. The girls on their own during the day have been playing Dampan Rampa, if I think I got the name right. Normally I have that name right off the top of my head. 3, and they're almost at the end. They're hoping to finish it tomorrow, and we're hoping that we're going to have time to do some gaming tomorrow, so that we can have some more episodes on Loaf Gaming for you guys. It's a pretty quick, if you haven't watched our gaming channel, and not very many of you have, and I don't blame you, it's very rough. It's mostly just the 3 of us talking into a Tascam recorder while we record the screen of whatever we're playing. But Valentina says we're pretty entertaining, but it definitely needs a lot of polish. There's a lot missing from the game, from the videos, so I'm working on that. All right, that was the day. Now, I want to talk about our topic for the day, which is comparing Guatemala and Nicaragua. Now, so as you know, I've spent the last couple of weeks in Guatemala. I traveled through Honduras and El Salvador, but I didn't spend a lot of time there, so I can't do very much in the way of comparisons between those. And they're kind of the in-between countries, so while I don't want to diminish them in any way, they do simply fall in between the 2 extremes of Nicaragua and Guatemala. And we are the 2 largest, I believe, physical countries in the region, but very different in a lot of ways. But I want to compare them, because very few people actually spend a lot of time in both, and they're incredibly different. A lot of times when you come to Central America, it feels like Central America is mostly a single zone, and in some ways it is, of course, but even within Central America itself, there are 2 really large traditional zones. There is the Mayan zone to the north and the non-Mayan zone to the south. So Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Western Panama are the non-Mayan zones. Of course, Panama proper is not Central America at all, but there's a large border zone in Panama that was culturally part of Mesoamerica, whereas Panama City is not Mesoamerica at all. But Belize, of course, fell to a mostly unpopulated area, but the land that was Belize, most of the Yucatan, Chiapas, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, that zone was the Mayan world, and while heavily related to Nicaragua and Costa Rica and Western Panama, they are 2 very distinct regions, and when you go between them, everything changes. The look of the people, the languages that are commonly used, the food that is often eaten, the style of clothing, and all those things. And a lot of the history. Down here in Nicaragua was much more of a rural zone, whereas Guatemala was much more of an urban zone. And much of that still remains today. So those traditional Mayan roots, or non-Mayan roots as the case may be, are heavy influences even now, hundreds of years later. Of course, that part of the world is still the Mayan Empire. It's simply less empire, but just as much Mayan. And down here in Nicaragua, it is still Nicaraguan, not Mayan, and that remains. So those pieces haven't changed. It's simply the way that they interact with each other, and it makes for a lot of really interesting disparity. Now, the difference is Guatemala was the center of the empire for most of its history and is considered the homeland of the empire. So Guatemala is surrounded by regions that fed it over history. Nicaragua was more of a hinterland, which is not to say that it was empty or not important. It was very importantly the meeting area, the zone that was secure enough with enough military and enough population that it was able to hold its own to keep the Incan Empire and those historic empires from South America from coming north, and to keep the Mayans and those respective cultures from the north from coming south. So it was a very important zone of holding the major empires from large cities at bay while having a lot of open area, and because they were able to keep them both away and hold their own, they became a combination of sort of a Silk Road, a trading route between these big places, an educational center, and most importantly, they were the safe meeting zone where other empires could meet safely, because Nicaragua traditionally was able to protect them. In order to do so, it maintained neutrality. So that's really interesting from a historical perspective. Today, it's also important to note that Guatemala is the highlands region. Now, of course, Guatemala is a very big country. The north has jungle, the south or the southwest has the slope and the Pacific coast, and it gets very hot. But the major population of Guatemala, the things that people think of as being Guatemalan, typical Guatemala, are very much in the highlands. And one area, Tecpan, someone even noted, when I was there, I made the comment, but I didn't tell anybody except for Valentina, that it felt like we were in Switzerland to me. It looked like it. She said it looks like Switzerland in pictures to her. And the weather and everything felt like Switzerland. And someone even said, Tecpan is known as the little Switzerland in Guatemala. And I'm like, well, that makes sense. It's so many people live in this really mild, beautiful climate. It's cool. It reminds you of England, a little bit warmer for sure. But between the mountains and the tropical location, it feels much like Western Europe does much of the time, but with that even sunlight and year-round mild weather. Absolutely fantastic. Because of that weather difference, all of your food is different. The type of food that's going to grow there is very different. Here in Nicaragua, we're going to get papaya and pineapple. In Guatemala, you're typically getting strawberries and raspberries. It's very different. And so those little things create a big disparity in food. Food creates a big disparity in the way that you live and cook. And of course, the weather also creates a huge difference in how people dress. In Nicaragua, everything's about staying cool. And in Guatemala, it's more about staying warm. Those are not things that you expect, but of course, both are full of lakes and volcanoes. So there's a lot shared between the cultural affinity, the interaction between the people historically, the fact that they were together during the Central American Federation, but there's also this huge difference in that the highlands and lowlands, the cool weather and the hot weather really make for a lot of major differences. Plus here it is, I hate to say flat because it is not flat, but it is relatively flat, whereas Guatemala is extremely hilly in the populated zones. Nicaragua does have a lot of mountains without a lot of people in them, of course. That being said, Esteli, Matagalpa, Jinotega are all mountain cities, and there's plenty of mountain locations in Nicaragua you can visit. Just like in Guatemala, there's plenty of low-lying jungle and beach destinations that you can go to. But where the populations are very different historically. Also historically, Nicaragua has a very large focus on the lakes, whereas Guatemala always had people on the lakes, but it's not the major focus of the countries. Those things are a little bit different as well. It really was interesting to me to see today how different Guatemala and Nicaragua are. And I think that this makes for a lot of excitement here in the region. One of the things that I'm really excited about is being able to use Guatemala as a secondary destination while here. Living in Nicaragua is fantastic, and I chose it for a reason, right? I'm not second guessing that choice. People made fun of me. Oh, once you go to Guatemala, you're going to wish that's where you lived. And that's not the case. I love living in Nicaragua. But there are a lot of things that happen anywhere. No matter where you are, you're going to want variety. And these are relatively small countries. So being able to find a lot of variety in a small space is a really big win. And when that variety doesn't just come with cultural variety, but with different food and weather, terrain, and so forth, that makes for a lot more excitement than you're going to get in some other way. So this is really cool. Beyond that, the difference in how cities are structured is a really big deal. Now, some places are more similar. Places like Granada here in Nicaragua are very similar to Granada here in Nicaragua is very similar to Antigua in Guatemala. They are old colonial cities that have been very carefully maintained and are primarily focused on tourism. Antigua has a lot more tourists today than Granada does, but traditionally Granada has an awfully large number. And both of them feel that way. When you're in those cities, you feel that you're in a tourist center. You're basically living in a living museum, and that can be really special, just like Bruges in Belgium, right? It's a unique opportunity to do something very special, and we need places like that because if you don't have specially preserved locations, then you're going to lose them as modern development will override the benefits of tourism and history. So it's great that we have them, but I have to note, because this came up in conversation in the threads with Blue Angel, we were talking about it a bit. Blue Angel is from Antigua. I used to live in Granada, and for me, both cities are places that are really important to visit, and I recommend visitors see them, but I also recommend that your time be very limited in them. And when I lived in Granada, one of the things I found very quickly, and my family found, is that we did not like living there at all. In fact, living in Granada was so dramatically not what we wanted that it took 6 years for me to convince my wife that returning to Nicaragua and Central America in general did not mean returning to a Granada, but that it could mean someplace very different, like here in Leon and out on the beach in Las Piñitas, the places that we now spend our time. Leon actually does have a lot of affinity with those countries. It is a really, really old colonial city with a lot of preservation, which you see in my videos all the time. But it is very different. It is not focused on tourism. It simply allows for tourism. It doesn't completely curtail development. It just has a colonial center that it maintains very carefully. There's a lot of, outside the middle of the city, there's a lot of opportunity for development and modernization there. And you see that in some of my videos where I go to some outlying neighborhoods, but you have to go to very far outlying neighborhoods. All of the central barrios anywhere near downtown are all very well preserved colonial regions, just like here in La Barrio, which is the oldest of the barrios. Everything is colonial, and you see almost nothing that is modern construction. And when you do, it's because something burned down or there was never something there. But even when you build, you have to match most of the time. I don't know exactly what all the rules are like, but it's very strict, extremely strict, to the point where it actually causes a lot of problems in the city. Granada and Antigua struggle with those things as well. Of course, they all also benefit from the advantages of being a preserved colonial city. Here, though, it is a colonial city that primarily locals live in. The number of expats and tourists that are in it, while they're prevalent, they're not the principal population. When you're in Granada, you begin to wonder if there's much else. And if you're in Antigua, I really felt like there was extremely little other than the tourist infrastructure. When I go out in Granada, I can, because I live there, I know how to avoid the tourist centers. Here in Leon, though, you naturally avoid them. You actually have to kind of go out of your way to find the tourist spots. In Antigua, I walked all over the city and I could not get away from the tourist zone easily. I mean, obviously you could walk straight out of it and just go off into another direction, but the entire downtown zone was completely touristy, and I couldn't find any areas where locals were going out and doing things, restaurants for locals, nothing like that. Even in the markets, it felt primarily like it was for the tourists, and they acted that way. People, if you're here in Leon, just to give an example, and you go into the central market, you can go in and film and whatever as a tourist. Nobody cares because you're the only one and you're not disrupting anything. But in Antigua, people got really upset if you took a camera into the market, because everyone brings a camera into the market and nobody's shopping. They're all just taking pictures and they are unable to make a living because of it. So they get really grumpy because you're getting in the way of what they wish would be an actual market. They want you to buy things, not take pictures of them, which is completely understandable. But that only happens when you have a big tourist population. If you didn't have that, that would naturally not be an issue. 1 or 2 people taking pictures of the market would actually be a good thing because it would help drive people to it. Here, there's so many people taking pictures, it kind of drives people away. Oh, I don't need to go there. I've already seen it. Oh, I don't want to go. This is just a bunch of tourists taking pictures. So they want to discourage that, and that kind of tells you what the market is like. So those things, there's a lot of similarities. Where you get big differences is more in the capital. So the capital here in Nicaragua is Managua, and it is a relatively small capital for the region, just 1.1 million people. It does not have high rises, it doesn't have a dense downtown, and for the most part, it does not feel like a big modern city. It has some beautiful neighborhoods. I like Managua a lot. I recommend for people who are spending any major amount of time in Nicaragua not to avoid it, but to go out and discover some of the cool regions and the amazing food. And it's got some really cool scenes, whether it's their art scene, the museums, the restaurants, the club district. There's a lot of great stuff in Managua. The waterfront is fantastic. Don't skip Managua, don't give up on it. It's quirky, but it has a lot to offer. But Guatemala City feels like a Madrid. It is a giant, completely modern, world-leading city that will knock your socks off and you will never guess exists in Central America. This is unique to Guatemala for the region, and that kind of makes it unique, period, because they're the only one in the region, and regional is kind of important. Having a Guatemala City as something that we can access is not something we expected at all. We had no idea that that was there. I mean, we knew the city was there, but no one was telling us that it was this Mexico City rivaling massive capital of super modern, high-tech, anything you could possibly want, with the range of extremely high-end and extremely affordable barrios all mixed together. we could look some of that stuff up, but when you read it online, it doesn't give you the feel and information that you really expect. So that disparity from Nicaragua especially is amazing. It means that not that far away, of course it is a 10-hour drive, but only a 10-hour drive away is a completely different world. Not just the difference between Nicaragua and Guatemala, but the difference between a Nicaraguan city and Guatemala city are even more dramatic than the differences you get between the countries. But beyond that, it's everything. The architecture, the fields, the restaurants, the driving, everything is pretty different. And I don't want to say one is better than the other. They are two different takes on the region. And a lot of it, again, by necessity because of climate and weather, but it is two uniquely beautiful regions. And I want to spend a lot of time in Honduras and El Salvador as well, because I think that there is a whole bunch of awesome variety coming from them as well. And I've spent some time in Honduras. I've crossed El Salvador from end to end twice now and seen a lot of it, but there is so much that I know they have to offer that I want to explore and be able to share with you guys and to experience myself. But I think Nicaragua and Guatemala most likely contain the greatest disparity in everything in the region, whether it's accent, which, by the way, the accent in Guatemala is so much more easy for me to understand coming from the United States and using Duolingo. Like, Guatemalan Spanish is kind of the universal standard that most people work towards. When people say, oh, that's Mexican Spanish, they have like very Mexican things. Guatemala, while certainly having their own accent and certainly having their own words and terminology and such, their own lexicon, they are considered the most neutral of any Spanish spoken in the region, and I believe in the entire Western Hemisphere, and in some ways considered more neutral than Spain, which, like Great Britain, has kind of swerved off from the main language as it is spoken universally and become kind of their own thing. So Guatemalan Spanish is uniquely clear and easy to understand for someone coming from places like I do, from the United States or Canada, where you're learning Latin American Spanish abroad. It's also a really popular place to go to study Spanish. There's a lot of Spanish schools there, as there are in many places in this region, but they are specifically popular for that in places like Quetzaltenango, Antigua, and Lago de Atitlan. Those are my differences. I don't have a real in-depth analysis of everything that's different between the two places, and I think it would be unfair to do so unless you lived for many years in both, and it would take a lot of research to come up with a really strict list of, wow, it's like this here and that here, because both are large places with a lot of internal variety. So what I'm used to here in León or in Granada or in San Juan del Sur, you're probably going to find a lot of that similar in Guatemala, just not in the places that I have been to. And of course, when you are a tourist, if you were to come to Nicaragua as a tourist and visit Granada, especially, and then visit Managua, you would have a very different view of the country than if you lived in those places, or if you were staying in a Matagalpa or a León, for example. And so as a tourist in Guatemala, there's a lot of getting a different view than I would if I was living in those cities, which is one of the reasons why I'm so interested in being able to get an apartment and live part-time in Guatemala City or possibly in Quetzaltenango, because there is so much value to be found in actually living in that place and experiencing everyday life in that culture. Thanks for joining me. Please remember to like and subscribe, ask your questions below, leave your comments, and plan your trips to Nicaragua, Guatemala. Which one are you interested most in visiting? Let me know what questions you have about either one. Where do you want me to visit and explore next? I'm really close to getting out and doing more exploration. I did have to cancel the Costa Rica trip that we had coming up. I was supposed to be there today, but I am going to be going in just a couple weeks, so that is still happening. It just got postponed a few weeks, so don't give up on me. We are heading to Costa Rica. We have to, simply because of our visa situation. It's just a requirement. So we're going to be going there very soon with the family, and I'm hoping we can do some really cool stuff while we're there. And let me know what you think about the camera setup today, because I'm hoping that this worked out really well. We'll see. Thanks for joining me. I will see you all tomorrow.